Hi, I'm Charlie Hill, Curator of Canadian Art here at the National Gallery of Canada. I have the privilege of having curatorial responsibility for the works by Tom Thomson and other Canadian artists in the gallery's collection. The gallery has the largest and certainly the most important collection of works by Tom Thomson, thanks to a very long history of my predecessors with the artist himself and with those who supported him and furthered his career and managed his estate. The National Gallery acquired its first painting by Tom Thomson in 1914. This small canvas called Moonlight of 1913-14, painted in from a study in Algonquin Park, probably painted in his studio in Toronto studio. It was only the second painting he ever sold, the first one having been acquired by the Government of Ontario in 1913. This small canvas cost $150 at the time. It depicts the moon and the sky reflected in the lake below. And what's so characteristic of the early works of Thomson is this very strong horizontal of the far shore and the high skies, something seen also in The Silent Lake of 1913, a work acquired by the gallery much later. After Thomson's death, the National Gallery had the ability to acquire a good selection of works from the Thomson estate. And in 1918, we bought 2 canvases, Autumn's Garland and the Jack Pine, and 25 oil sketches from Tom Harkness, Tom Thomson's brother-in-law, through Dr. McCallum, Thomson's patron. Autumn's Garland, I think, is a remarkably powerful canvas, painted during the winter of 1915-16 from a sketch, an oil sketch he painted up in the park in 1915. Certainly the canvas itself is much more flattened, the background is flattened. The trellis of autumn foliage of the garland that weaves its way from the center left down to the foreground, then up to the upper right corner, I think is really extremely powerful. One thing that's always certainly amused me about this canvas, of course, is this rigid lines, almost impasto, built up at one point. And the artist Jackson talked about Thomson being given a canvas that had a tear in it. And this is in fact, the canvas I finally figured out, because what he did was he stitched the canvas and then in fact incorporated into the canvas as a pictorial element. The decorative aesthetic that characterizes Thomson's work of 1915-16 certainly comes in part from his graphic design, which many of them are employed in commercial art for the tourism, for the railways. But also, I think, there's a great influence of the Scandinavian exhibition, which Harris and MacDonald saw in Buffalo in January 13. And that reduction of recession in space, that decorative arrangement of elements in the foreground is very characteristic of the Swedish work, which then gets translated into the Canadian context. And again, that's characteristic of Thomson. As self-taught artist, he was always learning from his peers. First Beattie, then Jackson, then Harris. And one can see him working his way through the lessons learned from the other artists until he comes out with his own voice. It was in the fall of 1915 that Dr. McCallum, who was already a patron of Tom Thomson A.Y. Jackson, commissioned decorations for his cottage at Go Home Bay on Georgian Bay. And MacDonald went up and measured the panels and came back, and the artists started working on them, Lismer, Thomson, and MacDonald himself. They're very flat, linear, decorative, and fully function the decorative aspect, their function carried out in this space extremely well. And so you have an autumn foliage, a sort of more green, linear tendrils growing down from a green tree, and then also one, again, more autumn scene. And they make a very interesting comparison with the MacDonalds, which carry out a very similar function of filling the gaps between the larger scenes, which depict summer life at Go Home Bay.